As the old saying goes, everything's bigger in Texas. Well, even the football stadiums, apparently. Timothy Brown of footballarchaeology.com joins us to talk about a giant stadium in Houston, and it's not the one you're thinking about. Tim's up in just a moment to tell us all about it.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal for positive football history, and welcome to another edition of Tuesday FootballArchaeology.com Day. Timothy V. Brown is here to talk about one of his tidbits he's written recently. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren. Look forward to chatting. This is a giant of a tidbit that we get to talk about.
A giant of a tidbit. And folks, you may be thinking the word giant maybe in a different context than what Tim is talking. We will not be talking about the professional team from New York so much today, but rather a large object that's connected with football. And a recent tidbit that Tim's wrote titled Glenn McCarthy and Houston's Giant Stadium. So Tim, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so this one's kind of fun. So my lovely and beautiful wife is a big fan of the movie Giant. And, it's got James Dean, it's got Rock Hudson, it's, got a couple other people. And I say that because we'll get back to that in a moment. So, back in the late 40s, you had the NFL and then you had the AAFC, and they were basically competing with one another. And so, there were probably, 16, 18 teams between the two leagues. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of cities that did not have a franchise. And so, there was kind of, as has gone on for a long time, there are different cities and different groups of people trying to figure out a way to buy a franchise and move it to their town or to get a new franchise. And so that was happening in Houston. And in Houston, one of the challenges that a lot of cities had was that they didn't have an adequate stadium, at least for what the NFL wanted. And, which is kind of funny because they were playing in places like, Briggs Stadium, later Tiger Stadium. They were playing in Fenway. They were playing in Wrigley. So some of those places just weren't great football stadiums, but nevertheless, so they still felt Houston didn't really have what they needed. And so at the time, the University of Houston was looking at maybe building a bigger stadium, a new stadium. Rice was talking about expanding theirs. And so there was this guy named Glenn McCarthy who kind of stepped up and said, I have plans for a 100,000 seat stadium with a retractable roof. It's going to cost $6.5 million to build, which seems like nothing nowadays. And he was willing to put up the first $3 million just as a gift, to the community. Now, this guy McCarthy was kind of a crazy character. He had grown up in Texas, had gone to Houston schools, but then transferred. Anyway, he's kind of I don't think he was the greatest student. And at least later in life, he enjoyed to knock back a few, which caused him to knock around a couple other things. So he's kind of a crazy guy. And then he ended up, Tulane recruited him, but he couldn't get in academically. So then he played for high school in Louisiana. And then they found out, they got him in the state playoffs. They found out partway through that he wasn't eligible because of his past in Texas. So then he ends up going to some other like prep school in West Texas. And then he ends up at Texas A&M. Gets booted for some kind of hazing incident. And then he ends up at Rice, where I think he was on the roster for a year or two. And then he leaves school. And he becomes a oil wildcatter and ends up, hitting it, multiple times. So he's one of these guys who made a fortune 3 or 4 times and lost it, 3 times.
Hmm.
So I think he had some money in the end, but he had his ups and downs. Um, and so that's kind of who this guy was. He's kind of a little bit of a nut. And in that movie, well, it was book first, and then the movie Giant, he is this guy, McCarthy was the basis for the character Jet Rink, who is played by James Dean in that movie. So anybody that's familiar with the movie Giant, he's that character. So anyways, the whole stadium thing doesn't happen. And, he's still trying to get either NFL, AAFC. He's able to convince the AAFC to come to Houston. And in 1949, he ran and hosted the Shamrock Bowl, which was the Cleveland Cleveland Browns, who were the champion that year. They played an all-star team comprised of guys from all the rest of the teams in the league. And so, they host this thing, and like he was a big showman. He had like there are some quotes, a couple of guys like Y.A. Tittle, claimed like it was the biggest event he ever attended in his life. Just like it was just splashy, and the food, the drink, the women, the everything, kind of whatever you wanted. If you were a player in the day or two, after the game, then, it was available to you. So then that never really went anywhere because, well, the AFC folds right after that. But then he builds a big hotel called the Shamrock Hotel. And it was like this big luxury place in Houston, but it was too far away from downtown, so it never really made it. But like same thing when he opened it, he had trains and airplanes coming in from Hollywood, had sports celebrities coming in, and so it was this big splashy event. So anyway, it's just this kind of crazy character. He was on the cover of Time magazine in 1950. So, he wasn't a schlub, I mean, he was a big deal, and but still just ups and downs, and then I think he kind of settled down a little bit later in life, and you know
Hmm.
uh kind of kicked his heels up and rested a little bit.
Wow, that is quite the tall tale there. Everything's
Yeah,
bigger in Texas, including
yeah.
the stadiums and the stories about the stadium. That's quite an extravagant character, sounds like.
Well, and think about it. I mean, I don't have anything to really go. I mean, I didn't really find any evidence of this, but if you think about it, so he was saying his stadium was going to have an aluminum retractable roof, right? And so that was going to be in Houston. Well, what's the first city that had a dome?
Yeah,
It
the
was Houston.
Reliant Stadium. Yeah,
So, were the two connected? I don't know, but I would guess that, he planted a seed, for those folks down there about this whole covered stadium thing.
but I mean, 100,000. That's a gigantic stadium. There's
Yeah.
probably only what 3 or 4 stadiums, and they're all college stadiums that can
Yeah.
seat that. And no, I don't think there's a professional stadium that can. So
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Yeah. And, so, it's, uh, college stadiums, especially early on, they'd build these big ones, and it was really just, like even like Harvard Stadium and Yale, the Yale Bowl. I mean, those things, their capacity was intended for the rivalry games. You know, early season they get 5, maybe 10,000 people, but they wanted to be able to seat 40, 60, 70,000 for the big games. Because that's when the alums came back and donated money.
Hmm.
So and renewed old friendships and whatnot. So
Well, stadiums were built much better back in the day because you're getting a century out of stadiums where now you have like Cleveland, their stadiums like 21 years old and they're, hey, we got to build a new stadium. This thing's outdated.
yeah,
I'm thinking, geez, I've had pairs
Yeah.
of socks last longer than that, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing is even like, you look at Northwestern, colleges, with very few exceptions, they build, they expand and renovate their stadium. And sometimes they get to the point like Northwestern where you just got to tear it down and rebuild, but they do it in the same footprint or nearly so, right? Whereas pros, it's like, well, we'll either build it out in the burbs, you know, build, play in a different state in the case of, New York.
And, and the taxpayers pay for it most of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
That's
Isn't that
crazy.
great?
Yeah. Wow. Oh, great stuff. I mean, that's a great story, and really, really glad that you could tell that and preserve that history because it's really a cool one. That I've never heard before till I read it in
Yeah,
your tidbit. And you have other stories like this that come up all the time that the common football fan and even people that are into football history all the time don't know about. And maybe you could share with folks how they could partake in those.
sure. Just go to footballarchaeology.com. If you haven't been there before, it's going to ask you to enter your email address. And if you do that, then you're, effectively you're subscribing. Um, and if you subscribe, you'll get, every time I send an article or publish an article, you'll get an email that has the article, the images, etc. in it. Alternatively, go out to the site, whenever you want and, check through the archives or, whatever's on the front page and have at it.
All right. Well, Tim Brown, we appreciate you coming on here and talking about this subject and love to talk to you again next week.
Very good. Thank you.